A message of discontent against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau is abusing his power.
And demand that Trudeau leave.
Not a fan of Trudeau because I don't think he's capable of saying an honest word, and I truly mean that. Trudeau, who was
Abusing.
Once again expressed their message of discontent against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau is abusing his power.
And demand that Trudeau leave.
not a fan of Trudeau because I don't think he's capable of saying an honest word, and I truly mean that. Trudeau, who was struggling to maintain popularity, to maintain his government, picked a divisive wedge issue. Because it was a divisive wedge issue, imposed it on Canadians and then attempt to insist that it was justified by the science. So he risked splitting the country apart and pitting people against each other personally and socially to facilitate his government's grip on power.
That's what it appears to be at this point, yeah.
Oh boy. It's no wonder no Canadian newspaper would publish that. That's hardly a story at all. And I heard the same thing about operations at the provincial government levels in Canada from very reliable sources, that all this so-called reliance on science was complete bloody nonsense, and that what was instead happening was that governments were conducting opinion polls like mad, which is not necessarily a bad thing in itself, but often is, and ruling on that basis, deriving policy on that basis, so on the basis of public fear and whim, and then passing that off as scientific. And that's pretty horrible. They didn't trust the Trudeau government at all. And so there were all sorts of people, and some of them I suppose were conspiratorial in their inferences, but many weren't, who thought there's something fishy going on here. I don't trust this a bit.
When you see this kind of policy implemented by governments, there are three things you can primarily do. I mean, you can accept it, you can fight it, or you can run away. Running away wasn't an option for us. Accepting it wasn't an option. So how can we fight it? We're not in politics. The opposition parties throughout the summer of 2021 were weak. I mean, Erin O'Toole, I think, just demonstrated an extraordinary lack of vision and weakness throughout the summer of 2021 by seemingly going along with Trudeau. It's quite possible that Trudeau and the government, in doing what they've done, have very badly misread the numbers, if nothing else. I think they maybe thought that people fell into one of two camps. Either they would be people that would be pro-mandates or people that would be against them. I mean, maybe Trudeau's done us all a favour by pushing Canada towards the end of what some might see as a political adolescence.
Well, I was thinking when Trudeau called the truckers misogynists and bigots and said that they were fomenting a rebellion in Ottawa, let's say financed by MAGA Republicans of all the preposterous things, I thought, because I was down in the States when that was happening, talking to Americans, telling them that this was the story, and they were like open-jawed in amazement, including the Democrats, that anyone would ever possibly believe that. And then I thought, well, you better give the devil his due. Why would Canadians be willing to fall for that, let's say? And then I thought, well, here's the story, man. It's like, for 150 years, 150 odd years, we've really been able to evince a reasonable trust in our political institutions. All three political parties, from right to left, governed with some degree of credibility and decency and predictability. And then the legacy media did their job being responsible critics. And I say you could even say that of the CBC for many years. And the education system was reliable, and the legal system wasn't taken over by DEI warriors, and so forth. And now all that's, or a lot of that, is changed. And so now Canadians were being asked by their Prime Minister to accept one of two stories. Either the truckers, for example, were misogynists and bigots hell-bent on destabilizing Canadian democracy, or you could no longer trust the government in a fundamental sense, or the legacy media, and God only knows how much of the education system and the courts. And so, in some sense, for a sensible and conservative people, the logical choice there was to, well, assume the lesser devil and think that the truckers and the anti-vaxxers, so-called, and so forth, were, a fringe misogynist and bigot group, and that everything in the background was really running as it should be. But As I said, I heard exactly the same story several months ago from high-level consultants to provincial governments across Canada, that they were doing the same thing, ruling by whole, post hoc justifying it by science. Her claim fundamentally is that this was nothing but blatant, cynical, narcissistic politicking of the lowest order. And we might say, well, no, that's probably an oversimplification. There must have been some other justification generated like in good faith and then also post hoc as at least as a cover-up. But essentially, in some sense, what you seem to be saying is that you've uncovered very little evidence of any of that in the cross-examinations. So even as a scam, it wasn't a very good one.
There's a principle in governance, which is this. Governments can't just create any policies that they like. There's a difference between the government and the legislature. And anything a government does in terms of making rules, it has to have authorization to do in a statute that the legislature has passed. The fact of the matter is that governments make policies that are politically motivated all the time. And they're allowed to do that as long as they can fit them within the authority that they have in a statute. But the problem for the government in this respect is this, that the rationale that they've given, if they've given one at all, does not fit within the authority that the Aeronautic Act gives. So in other words, the minister is allowed to create interim orders that have to do with the safety of the airline industry.